Good evening. You've come at a late hour, but that's for the best. The exhibits in this particular cafe and gallery are best viewed after the sun has gone down, when the shadows are long and the world outside has grown quiet. Welcome. My name is Steve Stockton, and it's my privilege to be your guide once again tonight through this rather unique collection. There are no impressionist landscapes here, no serene marble statues. The art we collect here in the Night Cafe is of a different sort. Each canvas, each sculpture, each work of art is a doorway, a frozen moment that serves as a preface to a story. Stories of the strange, the sad, the justly punished. Tales of ordinary people, perhaps just like yourself, who take one wrong step and find themselves on an unfamiliar road, heading toward a destination they never intended to book. So, if you'll be so kind as to step this way, the tour is about to begin. Pay no mind to the whispers you might hear in the long, dark hallways. They're merely the echoes of past visitors and prior exhibits. We have a great deal to show you tonight, a panorama of human folly and cosmic irony, hanging here for your private viewing. This is the Night Cafe. Before you is a canvas of breathtaking scope, a mural depicting a city of tomorrow, a utopia of gleaming spires, flying vehicles, and citizens with beatific smiles. It's a vision of perfection, a world without want or war. But if you look closely, down here in this dark corner, almost lost in the shadows of a flawless building, you can just make out a face. It's a faded, ghostly image of a man, and his expression is one of profound eternal regret. This is the story of that man, James Moss, an artist who was given the power to create a better world. A cautionary tale for anyone who believes that perfection is a worthy goal, forgetting that it is our flaws, our messy human imperfections, that truly prove we exist at all. James Moss was a man marinated in bitterness. He was an artist of immense talent, a fact known only to him and the dust bunnies that colonized the corners of his cramped, peeling apartment. His canvases, stacked against the walls like tombstones of forgotten dreams, were vibrant, angry, and brilliant. They were also completely unsold. He saw the world in vivid color, but the world saw him in shades of gray, if it saw him at all. He painted masterpieces for an audience of cockroaches and subsisted on a diet of instant noodles and resentment. His fortune, or misfortune, changed on a Tuesday. He was rummaging through a dusty corner of a junk shop, looking for cheap canvases to buy and paint over, when he found it. A small wooden box containing a set of old oil paints. The tubes were lead, heavy, and cool to the touch, their paper labels so faded as to be unreadable. There was nothing remarkable about them, yet he felt an odd pull, a strange static hum that seemed to emanate from the cracked wood of the box. He bought them for $1 he couldn't afford and took them home. That night, his stomach aching with hunger, he stared at a small blank canvas. He had nothing to eat, no money, and no prospects. In a fit of grim, ironic humor, he opened the old paint box. He squeezed a dollop of crimson onto his palette, mixed it with a touch of yellow and white, and, with a few deft strokes, painted a perfect, gleaming apple. It was a small act of defiance against his empty stomach, a two-dimensional meal. He set the brush down, turned to boil some water for his last pack of ramen, and when he turned back, he froze. Sitting on the table, exactly where the canvas had been, was an apple. Not a painting, but a real, solid, gleaming red apple. So perfect it looked unreal. A single drop of painted water glistened on its skin. He could smell its sweet, crisp scent. With a trembling hand, he picked it up. It was cool and heavy. He took a bite. The crunch echoed in the silent apartment, and the juice that filled his mouth was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. His heart beat quickly. It was impossible. Hallucination brought on by hunger, no doubt. He had to be sure. He grabbed another canvas scrap. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the brush. He thought of what he needed the most: money. He carefully, meticulously painted a crisp $20 bill. He rendered every detail, from the stern face of Andrew Jackson to the delicate filigree of the border. The moment he lifted his brush from the final stroke, the painted bill vanished from the canvas. He frantically searched his pockets, his hands clumsy with a terrifying hope. And there, in his worn leather wallet, nestled among receipts and lint, was a brand new, impossibly crisp $20 bill. James Moss did not sleep that night. He had become a god. The days of bitterness were over, washed away in a flood of color from his magical tubes. He painted money, stacks of it. He painted gourmet meals that appeared steaming on his rickety table. He painted a new suit, tailored perfectly to his frame. He painted away the sallow complexion of poverty, giving himself a healthy, confident glow. He left his squalid apartment and painted himself the key to a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city he had once despised. For a time, it was enough. He lived a life of pleasure. But the artist in him, the part that had screamed for recognition in that lonely apartment, was not satisfied with mere wealth. He had the power to create, and his ambition, long starved, was now ravenous. He didn't just want to enjoy the world, he wanted to remake it. He would create his masterpiece, not on a small canvas, but on the canvas of reality itself. He would paint a utopia. He commissioned a wall-sized canvas and had it delivered to his new studio. And he began to work. He painted with a feverish intensity, the magical oils flowing from his brushes. He painted gleaming cities of impossible, beautiful architecture, powered by clean, silent energy. He painted lush green parks where concrete jungles once stood. He painted away the smog, revealing a sky of brilliant, perfect blue. Then he painted people. He painted them healthy and strong, free from disease and decay. He painted them with serene, happy smiles, their faces devoid of worry or anger. He meticulously painted away the sources of human misery. He painted away poverty, creating a world of effortless abundance. He painted away crime, rendering violence and greed obsolete. He painted away conflict, bigotry, and hatred, leaving only harmonious, peaceful coexistence. He worked for months, lost in his creation. The world outside his penthouse window remained the same, a drab counterpoint to the vibrant paradise taking shape on his canvas. He was creating a new Genesis, and he was its sole architect. Finally, the day came. The mural was complete. It was a breathtaking vision of a perfect world. He stood back, his body aching, his spirit soaring. It was his ultimate triumph. With a single, final tube of white paint, he added the last detail, a brilliant glint of sunlight on the highest spire of his central tower. He laid the brush down. A strange, shimmering light filled the studio. The view from his window began to waver, to dissolve like a watercolor in the rain. The gray buildings, the noisy traffic, the messy, imperfect world he knew began to fade, replaced by the silent, gleaming spires of his own creation. His penthouse itself softened and reformed, its opulent clutter replaced by the serene, minimalist aesthetic he had painted. The air grew still and quiet, filled with a soft, harmonious hum. He had done it. He had painted paradise into existence. He laughed, a wild, triumphant sound, and threw open the door to his balcony, ready to step into the world he had made, to be hailed as its creator. He stepped out into the perfect, clean air. The smiling, beautiful people walked below, their movements graceful and unhurried. He shouted down to them, "Behold, it is I! I made this for you!" But no one looked up. A young couple, holding hands and smiling at each other with placid contentment, walked directly towards him. He braced himself for their adulation, but they didn't stop. They walked through him, their forms passing through his like smoke. He felt a moment of icy coldness, but they didn't even flicker. Panic seized him. He ran back into his apartment, then out into the hallway. He tried to touch a wall, but his hand passed through the smooth, white surface. He screamed, but no sound came out. He saw his reflection in a polished pane of glass, but it was faint, transparent, like an old photograph. The horror of his achievement crashed down upon him. In his quest to create a perfect world, he had painted away all of humanity's flaws. He had erased greed, anger, sorrow, and conflict, but he had forgotten that he, James Moss, was the sum of all those things. His ambition, born of bitterness. His genius, fueled by resentment. He was a flawed, greedy, angry man. And in a world of absolute perfection, there was just no place for a creature like him. By painting away imperfection, he had painted himself out of existence. He was a ghost in his own utopia, a silent observer, an invisible god, forever trapped outside his own masterpiece. He could see the perfect world he had made, but he could never touch it, never feel it, never be a part of it. He was the only soul in his paradise, and he was in hell. So, the next time you look upon a work of art, a vision of a world better than our own, perhaps give a small thought to the artist. James Moss got everything he ever wanted, a world that was a perfect reflection of his art. He is there still, a permanent silent resident of the city he built, a whisper of regret in a flawless world, a face in the corner of the painting, forever looking at what he created and what he lost. He's now a final, lonely exhibit here in the Night Cafe. This next exhibit is a study in mood, rendered in oil, grease, and neon. We see a lonely roadside diner, an island of light in a sea of encroaching fog. It's a place of last chances and final stops. But the focus of the piece, the source of its strange multicolored glow, is that vintage jukebox in the corner. Music, they say, has charms to soothe the savage breast, but it can also be a summons. It can be a memory that refuses to die, or an invitation to join the choir invisible. This is the story of Danny Keller, a young man in a hurry who made the fatal mistake of dropping a coin into a machine that only plays for the dead. On display here in the Night Cafe. The fog was a living thing, a thick gray beast that had swallowed the highway whole. It had crept into the engine of Danny Keller's Porsche, choking it into a sputtering metallic death. Now he sat in a booth at the Starlight Diner, a place that smelled of stale coffee and despair. His mood as foul as the weather, his suit was expensive, his watch was Swiss, and his patience was non-existent. The only other soul in the place was the cook, a man whose face was a road map of long nights and broken dreams. He moved with a leaden slowness behind the counter, wiping it with a rag that had seen better decades. The silence in the diner was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the drip of the fog condensing on the windowpane. It was a silence that grated on Danny's nerves. He was a man of noise, of city sounds, of roaring engines and loud music. This quiet felt like a judgment. His eyes scanned the room and landed on the jukebox. It was a magnificent beast, a Wurlitzer peacock of chrome and colored glass, glowing softly in the corner. It was the only thing in the diner that looked alive. "Hey, Pops," Danny called out, his voice sharp. "Jukebox work?" The cook looked up, his eyes lingering on Danny for a moment. "It works," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "But it's got a particular taste. Best to leave it be." Danny smirked. "What's the matter? Only plays polkas?" He slid out of the booth and walked over to the machine. The selection cards were yellowed with age, filled with names of singers he had never heard of. He saw a small, hand-painted sign taped to the glass. "Plays free." "My lucky night," he muttered, scanning the buttons. "I wouldn't do that, son," the cook said, his tone flat without urgency. It wasn't a warning so much as a statement of fact. That machine, it's a memorial. Danny turned, an amused grin on his face. "A memorial? To what? Bad music?" The old man sighed, placing his rag on the counter. "To the folks who never made it past this stretch of road. That highway out there, it takes its share. The locals, they say that box only plays the favorite songs of the dead. A last request, you might say." Danny let out a short, sharp laugh. He'd heard it all. Every backwater town had its ghost stories, its local superstitions designed to spook city folk. That's quite a story, Pops. You should sell tickets. To prove his point, to shatter the oppressive quiet and the old man's ridiculous fantasy, he jabbed a finger at a random selection, B-17. The name meant nothing to him. The inside of the jukebox lit up. There was a low whir, the sound of a mechanical arm selecting a vinyl disc, and a soft click as the needle dropped. A lone, twanging guitar note echoed through the diner, followed by a voice soaked in reverb and sorrow. It was a song of lost love, of a man driving through the night, searching for a ghost. Danny listened, his smirk slowly fading. The song was hypnotic, its melancholy melody creeping under his skin. It was simple, sad, and strangely familiar. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp night air. The song ended, the final chord hanging in the air before being swallowed by the silence again. "What was that?" Danny asked, his voice quieter than before. "Endless Road," the cook said, his eyes distant. "That was Bobby's song. Bobby Cressetti, young kid, maybe 20, drove a souped-up Ford, was supposed to get married that Saturday." The cook picked up his rag and began wiping the counter again, his movements slow and deliberate. "Had a fight with his girl, drove off angry. They found his car wrapped around that big oak tree at the bottom of the curve. The radio was still playing that song. Been playing it ever since, I guess." Danny swallowed hard. "That's a sad story." He tried to dismiss it, to retreat back into his shell of cynical superiority, but the melody had taken root in his mind. He walked back to his booth and sat down, the mournful guitar riff playing on a loop in his head. He drank his coffee. He checked his expensive watch. The tow truck was still an hour out. The fog pressed against the windows, and the silence in the diner seemed heavier than before, weighted down by the ghost of that song. He started humming it under his breath, the tune coming to him unbidden. He felt a strange restlessness, a powerful urge to be moving. He wanted to be in his car, on the road, driving fast into the fog. He wanted to turn on the radio and find that song. The thought was insane, but it was as real and as powerful as a craving. "It gets in you," the cook said, not looking at him. "The music. It wants an audience." "It's just a song," Daddy snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. His foot was tapping out the beat on the linoleum floor. The highway outside wasn't just a road anymore. It was a destination. The fog wasn't a hindrance. It was a veil, hiding something he felt compelled to find. He stood up, the screech of the vinyl booth echoing his frayed nerves. "I need some air." "There's nothing out there but the road, son," the cook said, his voice laced with a profound pity. "And it's a one-way street." Danny didn't listen. He couldn't. The song was too loud in his head now, a siren call from a phantom radio. He pushed open the diner door and the fog rolled in, cool and damp against the skin. He stood on the threshold, looking out at the ribbon of black asphalt that disappeared into the gray nothingness. He could almost hear it, faint and far away, that twanging guitar, that lonely voice. He took a step, and then another. He left the warm, dim light of the diner behind and walked out into the cold, wet dark. He was walking towards the music, a new listener answering an old summons, drawn by a melody he had foolishly chosen to play. The cook watched him go until the fog swallowed him completely. He shook his head, picked up an empty coffee cup from the table, and shuffled back to the sink. The jukebox in the corner gave a soft click, and the lights inside dimmed, waiting patiently for its next listener. They say every song tells a story, but some stories demand a new character. Danny Keller was a man who didn't believe in ghost stories, so he became one. A footnote in a songbook of the lost, a new voice in a choir that sings only in the deep of night, out on the endless road. An exhibit you can find for the price of a song down at the end of the hall, here in the Night Cafe. Next work before you hear this evening is a Baroque piece, heavy with shadow and gilded with a grim irony. It depicts two men, separated by a single ornate hourglass. On one side, a withered old man, his face a mask of weary resignation. On the other, a vibrant youth, his eyes burning with avarice. The sand in the top bulb, representing the old man's life, is nearly gone. But look closer. The bottom bulb, representing the young man's future, is overflowing, the grains of time spilling out of the frame and onto the gallery floor. This is the story of Alan Gibson, a young man who wished his life away, one grain of sand at a time. He learned a valuable lesson, albeit far too late. When you rush toward a finish line, you may find it is your own. For your consideration, here in the Night Cafe. Alan Gibson considered his great-uncle Cornelius to be less a person and more an obstacle. A stubborn, wheezing, infuriatingly long-lived obstacle that stood between him and the Gibson fortune. Alan lived in a wing of the sprawling Gibson estate, a gilded cage where he paced and plotted, his youth and ambition curdling into a poisonous resentment. Every cough from his uncle's chambers, every report from the nursing staff that Cornelius had managed to eat a full bowl of broth was a personal affront. Cornelius was ancient, a creature of dust and memories, his skin as thin and dry as parchment. But he clung to life with a quiet, infuriating tenacity. Alan, by contrast, was a portrait of vibrant, predatory youth. He was handsome, charming to those he wished to use, and utterly hollow inside. His life was on hold, waiting for the final, rattling breath from the room down the hall. He was a man dying of anticipation. His impatience led him to the city's dark, forgotten corners, to shops that dealt in more than just antiques. He sought a shortcut, a way to gently nudge fate in the direction he desired. He found what he was looking for in a dusty, incense-choked room with a beaded curtain, run by a man with eyes like chips of obsidian. There, on a velvet cloth, sat the Chronos hourglass. It was a beautiful, terrible thing, carved from a dark, veined wood and capped with tarnished silver. It held not sand, but a fine, shimmering black dust that seemed to drink the light. It is a tool of transference, the shopkeeper had explained, his voice a dry whisper. You place it in the presence of one whose time is near its end. You turn it, and it hastens the process. It gathers the remaining moments, the final grains of life, and empties them. And the price? Alan had asked, his eyes gleaming. It has none. It takes its own payment in the end. Alan had scoffed at the cryptic warning. He took the hourglass, feeling its strange cold weight in his hands. That night, he crept into his uncle's chambers. Cornelius was asleep, his breathing a shallow, rhythmic whisper in the opulent gloom. The room smelled of lavender and decay. Alan placed the hourglass on the marble mantelpiece, its dark wood a stark contrast to the family portraits and silver heirlooms. With a trembling, eager hand, he took hold of the hourglass and turned it over. The black dust began to fall, a silent, steady stream of descending darkness. Alan watched for a moment, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Then he slipped out of the room, his heart pounding with a triumphant rhythm. The next morning he felt off, a strange stiffness in his neck, a dull ache in his lower back. He dismissed it as the result of a poor night's sleep, his mind abuzz with plans of his impending fortune. He called the head nurse, his voice dripping with false concern. "How is my dear uncle this morning?" "Remarkably well, Mr. Gibson," the nurse replied, a note of surprise in her voice. "He asked for tea and toast. Said he had the most restful night's sleep in years." Alan frowned. He went to the mirror. Was that a new line around his eye? He leaned closer, and there, at his temple, was a single, unmistakable strand of gray hair. He plucked it out, his fingers trembling slightly. It was nothing, a coincidence. But the next day, the aches were worse. He felt a weariness deep in his bones, a fatigue that no amount of coffee could dispel. The nurse, meanwhile, reported that Cornelius had taken a short walk in the garden, leaning on her arm. He said the sun felt wonderful on his skin, she'd chirped. Panic began to prickle at the edges of Alan's confidence. He found himself checking his reflection constantly, searching for new lines, for more gray hairs. They were there. His skin seemed to be losing its tautness. His eyes, their bright, clear focus. He felt as if he were aging a year with every passing day. Meanwhile, his uncle's rejuvenation was becoming the talk of the estate staff. Cornelius was taking his meals in the dining room now. His voice, once a frail whisper, was regaining its sound. His eyes, once clouded with age, were now sharp and clear. He looked at Alan with a strange, knowing pity that set Alan's teeth on edge. The black dust in the hourglass continued to fall. A month after he turned it, Alan was a changed man. His back was stooped, his hair was shot through with silver, and his face a road map of worry lines. He needed a cane to walk the long hallways of the estate. He was a young man trapped in a rapidly aging body. The breaking point came when he saw his uncle, dressed in a tweed jacket Alan hadn't seen him wear in a decade, laughing with the gardener by the rose bushes. Cornelius stood tall. His cheeks had a healthy color, and he moved with a vigor that Alan now profoundly lacked. A scream of pure terror caught in Alan's throat. He stumbled, half running, to his uncle's chambers. The hourglass sat on the mantelpiece, the black dust in the top bulb almost gone. He grabbed it, his gnarled, trembling fingers fumbling with the slick wood. He had to turn it back. He had to stop it. He turned it over, but the dust did not reverse. The few remaining grains in what was now the top bulb simply hung there, suspended, as if in defiance. It is a tool of transference, Alan. It only flows one way. Alan spun around. Cornelius stood in the doorway, his posture straight, his eyes clear. He looked at Alan, at the stooped, withered creature he had become, and his expression was one of immense sadness. "You were always in such a hurry," Cornelius said, his voice gentle. "A hurry to live, without ever taking the time to learn how. I'd made my peace. I had a few months, perhaps a year. Moments I would have treasured. You have taken them, and you have given me yours in return." Alan stared at his hands, at the liver spots and raised veins. He looked at his vibrant, healthy uncle. The shopkeeper's words echoed in his mind. It takes its own payment in the end. The hourglass hadn't been tied to Cornelius. It was tied to its new owner. Every grain of black dust that had fallen was a moment of Alan's own youth, his own future, willingly, greedily given away. He drained his own life to top up his uncle's. He let out a dry, rattling sob. He had his inheritance, the house, the fortune. It was all his. But he was an old man, too frail now to enjoy it, with nothing ahead of him but the same quiet, lavender-scented decay he had so desperately wished upon another. And so, Alan Gibson lives out his days in the grand estate, a young man's ghost in an old man's body, a prisoner of his own impatience. He is a living testament to a simple, terrible truth. Be careful what you wish for, especially when you wish for time to move faster. For the sand in the hourglass of life only flows in one direction, and every grain that falls is a moment you will never get back. A final, bitter lesson, on display for all to see, here in the Night Cafe. This next painting for your consideration tonight is a portrait of a fractured man, a canvas split down the middle. On the left, we see a man in rags, his face a mask of haggard desperation. On the right, the same man, but dressed in a fine suit, a confident, easy smile on his lips. They seem to be looking at each other across the divide, a meeting of what is and what could have been. This is the story of Anderson Pemberton, a man who believed he could outsource his troubles, that he could delegate his misery and keep the happiness for himself. He learned a hard lesson in personal accountability. If you hire a substitute to live your life, you'd better pray they don't do a better job. Anderson Pemberton's life was a symphony of sighs. He sighed when he woke up, sighed at the burnt toast, and sighed all the way to a job he despised. He was an accountant, a profession he had fallen into like a man into an open sewer, and he spent his days drowning in the dreary numbers of other people's more successful lives. His own ledger was a disaster of debt and disappointment. His home life was no better. His wife, Helen, A woman whose once bright spirit had been eroded by his relentless mediocrity now regarded him with a cool, weary contempt. She didn't rage any more. The fire had gone out, leaving only the cold ashes of resentment. Anderson, for his part, saw her disappointment as just another unfair burden, another reason to sigh. He was a man who felt life owed him a great deal more than he was willing to work for. One rainy Tuesday, after a particularly brutal dressing down from his boss and a silent dinner that screamed louder than any argument, Anderson found himself in a dimly lit bar called The Alibi. It was there, hunched over a glass of cheap whiskey, that he was approached by a man who seemed to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his face pleasant but utterly forgettable. He called himself Mr. Silver. "You look like a man carrying a heavy load, Mr. Pemberton," Silver said, his voice smooth and quiet. Anderson grunted. "You have no idea." "Perhaps I do," Silver countered, sliding onto the adjacent stool. "What if I told you that you could lay that load down? For a time. What if you could delegate the dreary, the difficult, the demeaning parts of your existence?" Anderson stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate flicker of hope. "What are you selling? Some self-help nonsense?" "No, nothing so abstract," Mr. Silver said with a thin smile. "I represent a unique service. We provide a substitute, a perfect biological duplicate of yourself, programmed to handle any and all responsibilities you designate. It will go to your job, it will face your creditors, it will endure your domestic friction, shall we say. You, meanwhile, are free to enjoy the sabbatical you so richly deserve." It sounded like the ramblings of a lunatic, but Anderson was desperate, and desperation is a powerful lens that can make madness look like logic. "A double?" "A doppelganger," Silver corrected gently, "for a modest fee and a simple contract. 1 year. At the end of the term, he is deactivated, and you resume your life, hopefully refreshed." The fee was surprisingly small. The contract was a single page of dense, archaic script. Anderson barely scanned it. At the bottom was a place for a signature. Mr. Silver produced a small silver pen. Just a drop of blood to seal the arrangement. A formality, you understand. Anderson hesitated for only a second. A year without his boss, without the numbers, without Helen's disappointed eyes. A full year of freedom. He pricked his thumb and smeared a crimson signature on the line. The next morning, Anderson woke up to find a man standing in his bedroom, dressed in one of his own cheap suits. It was him. Perfectly, terrifyingly him, but with a difference. This Anderson stood straighter, his shoulders back. There was a quiet confidence in his eyes that Anderson had never possessed. "Good morning," the doppelganger said. His voice was Anderson's, but without the weary sigh embedded in every syllable. "I'll handle things at the office. Your briefcase?" Anderson, stunned into silence, just pointed. The double nodded, picked up the worn leather case, and left for work. Anderson was free. The first few months were bliss. He did all the things he claimed he had never had time for. He went to museums, read novels in the park, and took long, aimless, rambling walks. The doppelganger, whom he thought of as number 2, would come home each evening, endure Helen's cold silences or sharp remarks with placid calm, and present Anderson with a neatly typed summary of the day's events. It was perfect. Anderson was living the life of a gentleman of leisure, while his proxy suffered the slings and arrows of his miserable fortune. However, the first crack in his perfect new reality appeared about 3 months in. Number 2 came home and announced, "I received a promotion today." Anderson stared. "What? How?" "That cost-cutting initiative you outlined in your notes but never submitted? I refined it and presented it to the boss. He was very impressed." Anderson felt a strange, sour twist in his gut. It was his idea, one he had been too lazy and fearful to ever pursue. The changes accelerated. Number 2 didn't just absorb Helen's contempt. He began to engage with it. He listened to her. He asked her about her day. He fixed the leaky faucet Anderson had ignored for 6 months. He started bringing her flowers. Small things, at first. But Anderson, watching from the periphery, from the guest room he now occupied, saw Helen's armor begin to crack. He saw her smile, a real smile, for the first time in years. They started talking in the evenings, their voices a low, happy murmur from the living room. Anderson soon became a ghost in his own home, a spectator to his life being lived better by someone else. His friends would clap the doppelganger on the back, praising the new Anderson for his newfound wit and confidence. Anderson tried to join in, but his jokes fell flat, his presence once again awkward. He was the rough draft. Number 2 was the polished final edition. With a month left on the contract, panic began to set in. He confronted his double in the kitchen. This has to stop. This is my life. Number 2 turned from the stove, where he was making an omelet, Helen's favorite. His expression wasn't malicious. It was one of calm reason. "Is it your life, Anderson?" he asked quietly. "You didn't want this life, remember? You wanted to escape it. I simply inhabited the space you abandoned. I did the work. I repaired the damage. Helen is happy. The bills are paid. What part of this life do you believe you're still entitled to?" On the final day of the contract, Anderson, haggard and desperate, went to the address Mr. Silver had given him. He was going to end this. He would reclaim his life even if it was a mess. Mr. Silver greeted him with the same placid smile. "Ah, Mr. Pemberton, here to settle the account." "I'm here to terminate the account," Anderson said, his voice shaking. "The year is up." "Indeed it is," Mr. Silver agreed, steepling his fingers. "The contract is fulfilled. The debt is paid." A wave of relief washed over Anderson. It was over. He rushed home, ready to throw the imposter out, to beg for Helen's forgiveness, to start new again. But he found his key wouldn't fit in the lock. It had been changed. He hammered on the door, but there was no answer. He went to the living room window and peered inside. The room was warm and bright. Helen and his double were sitting on the sofa, sharing a bottle of wine. They were laughing. As Anderson watched, his heart turning to ice, the doppelganger looked up, his eyes meeting Anderson's through the glass. There was no triumph in his gaze, only a deep, profound pity. He gave a small, sad shake of his head, a gesture that said, "It's over. This is my home now." Anderson stumbled back from the window. He was locked out of his own life. He had outsourced the effort, and in doing so, had forfeited the reward. He was the husk, the rough draft, the man on the left side of the painting. And so we leave Anderson Pemberton, a stranger looking through the window at a life that is no longer his. He thought he had found a clever way to avoid his responsibilities, but in doing so, he made himself redundant. A chilling reminder that a life, much like a muscle, will atrophy from disuse. If you give it to another, you may find you can't get it back, especially if they prove to be better at it than you ever were. A final, sobering portrait, hanging forever here in the Night Cafe. This next piece for your consideration tonight is a lithograph, a relic from a bygone era of gaslight and grease paint. It's a vaudeville poster, its vibrant colors faded to muted suggestions, its edges peeling like sunburnt skin. It advertises the act of the marvelous Melmoth and his cabinet of mysteries. But look closely at the depiction of the cabinet itself. It's a simple black box, but the artist has rendered its open door as a patch of absolute, light-devouring darkness. And from that darkness, if you catch it just right, you can almost see two faint red points of light, like the eyes of something that has been waiting patiently for the curtain to rise. This is the story of a magician who, desperate for one last trick, found one that was all too real. Milton Moth, known to a dwindling number of theater-goers as the marvelous Melmoth, was a man haunted by the ghost of his own applause. He remembered the roar of the crowd, the sold-out houses, the scent of hot stage lights and success. Now the only sound he heard most nights was the echo of his own footsteps on a hollow stage and the scattered, polite claps of a few dozen patrons who had come in from the rain. His illusions, once grand, had grown tired. His top hat had a faint sheen of dust, and the magic, he feared, had gone out of him for good. His only remaining spark was his assistant, Clara. She was young, bright-eyed, and possessed a faith in him that he had long since lost in himself. She saw the master illusionist, not the weary man struggling to pay the rent on a second-rate boarding house. "You just need something new, Milt," she'd say, her optimism a painful counterpoint to his cynicism. "One great trick to remind them who you are." He knew she was right. He needed a miracle, and in his line of work, miracles were props you had to buy. His search led him to a part of the city that seemed to have been misplaced by time, a street of grimy brick facades and shuttered windows. There, nestled between a pawn shop and a derelict tailor, was a store he had never seen before. Its sign, written in flaking gold leaf, read, "A. Corvus, purveyor of antiquities and ephemera." The interior was a labyrinth of forgotten things, smelling of dust and ozone. The proprietor was a creature seemingly made out of the same stuff as his wares, ancient, shrouded in shadow, with eyes that held the dispassionate glint of polished jet. Milton explained what he was looking for: a centerpiece, an illusion to build a new show around. The old man, Corvus, said nothing. He simply led Milton to the back of the shop, to a space occupied by a single object. It was a cabinet. It wasn't the gaudy, gilded type favored by stage magicians. It was a stark, unadorned box, about 7 feet tall, constructed of a strange black wood that seemed to absorb the light, leaving no reflection. It had a single, heavy door with a simple brass handle. "A vanishing cabinet," Milton breathed, his professional eye assessing its clean lines and its lack of obvious trickery. That was the key. The simpler the prop, the more impossible the illusion. "It is a box," Corvus corrected, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "What happens inside is a matter of perspective." Milton felt an undeniable pull, a professional craving to know its secret. "How does it work?" Corvus smiled. "You put something in, you close the door, you open it again, it is gone. The method is, shall we say, proprietary to the design." "How much?" Milton asked, already knowing he probably couldn't afford it. Corvus smiled again, a brief, unsettling crack in his desiccated face. "The price is negligible. It has a way of settling its own accounts. Take it. See if it reminds you who you are." The cabinet was delivered that evening. It dominated the small stage of the Orpheum Theater, its silent black form a stark promise. Clara, however, was unnerved by it. "It feels cold, Milt," she said, her hand recoiling from its surface. "Something is not right with it." "It's a prop, Clara, a box of wood and nails," he said, his voice sharp with a hope he hadn't felt in years. He was the marvelous Melmoth again, on the cusp of a comeback. He spent a week designing the act, writing the patter, choreographing the dramatic reveal. He never once tried the trick. A true magician never rushes the reveal, not even for himself. The magic was in the performance, in making the audience believe. Opening night arrived. The theater was full, a sold-out crowd drawn in by Milton's frantic, last-ditch advertising blitz promising an all-new illusion that defies the laws of nature. A palpable buzz filled the air. The show was a success. His old tricks, polished and performed with a newfound vigor, charmed the audience. Then came the finale. The cabinet was rolled to center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Milton boomed, his voice resonating with its old power, "before you stands a simple box, the Cabinet of Mysteries. It has no mirrors, no trapdoors, no hidden compartments. It is merely a vessel, a doorway between what is and what is not." He presented Clara, radiant in a sequin dress. She smiled at the audience, but Milton saw the flicker of fear in her eyes as she approached the cabinet. She gave him one last trusting look and stepped inside. Milton closed the heavy door, the sound of a dull, final thud. He spun around, his cape flourishing. "Habit, evenuit, excessit, eruptit," he cried, the classic magician's patter. He knocked dramatically on the door. "Are you still there, my dear?" No reply. He knocked again. Silence. He threw the door wide open with a grand, triumphant gesture. The cabinet was empty. The gasp from the audience was followed by a split second of stunned silence, and then an explosion of applause. It was a roar, a wave of sound that washed over Milton, shaking him to his core. They were on their feet. They were shouting his name. Melmoth! Melmoth! He bowed, a wide, theatrical smile plastered on his face, his heart a frozen lump of dread in his chest. He knew. In that terrible, perfect moment of triumph, the old magician in him knew this was no illusion. The box was empty. There was no hidden compartment, no secret spring. Clara was simply gone. Backstage was a blur of congratulations from the theater owner and the stagehands. Milton mumbled excuses about Clara having a headache, about her slipping out the back to go home. He got rid of them all, locking the theater doors, leaving himself alone in the vast, silent dark, with his success and his horror. He approached the cabinet, his bravado gone, replaced by a cold, creeping terror. "Clara?" he whispered, his voice trembling. He ran his hands over every inch of the smooth, cold interior. It was solid, seamless. He was alone. He sat there for hours, the applause still ringing in his ears, a mocking echo. His career was reborn, but he had paid for it with a human life. As dawn approached, he was startled from his stupor by a sound, a faint, dry, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from inside the cabinet. He froze, straining to listen. There it was again. Scratch, scrape, scratch, scrape. It was the sound of a fingernail on dry wood, of something small and patient, trying to find a way out. The blood drained from his face. The cabinet wasn't a vanishing box. Not at all. It was a doorway. He had opened a door to somewhere else, somewhere dark and silent. He had pushed Clara through, and something on the other side had noticed. It had seen the door open, and now it was curious. He was trapped. The show was sold out for the next 6 months. The Cabinet of Mysteries was the toast of the town. He couldn't stop. Every night he performed the trick. He used bouquets of flowers, a cage with a dove, a silk handkerchief. Each one vanished utterly the moment the door was closed. Whatever was in there was learning. It knew the door opened, and it was eager for its cue. And so we leave the marvelous Melmoth. He is a star again. Crowds roar his name every night. But he is a man living on borrowed time, his life a performance for two audiences, the one in the seats and the one scratching away in the dark. He's a prisoner of his own greatest trick, forever wondering if tonight will be the night that, when he opens the door, something new and hungry will step out. A final, chilling exhibit on the price of fame here in the Night Cafe. The piece we present for your consideration this time is a delicate watercolor, a study in quiet desperation and impossible connection. It depicts a woman's hand, pale and hesitant, holding a fountain pen over a sheet of stationery. Beside her hand rests a single, withered black rose. It's a portrait of loneliness, a condition that can make a prison of any house. This is the story of Loretta Watts, a woman who had not stepped outside her door in 20 years. She found a connection to the world not through a window, but through a mailbox, and fell in love with a man she had never met. But, as is so often the case here in the lonely corners of the Night Cafe, some correspondents are further away than one might think, and the ink they use has been dry for a very long time. We call this one the Pen Pal. For 20 years, Loretta Watts' world had been defined by the four walls of her ancestral home. It was a fortress she had built against a memory, a fortress of dust motes dancing in sunbeams, of the familiar creak of floorboards, of silence. A tragic accident in the town square 2 decades prior had shattered her nerves, and the world outside had become a terrifying, chaotic place that she could no longer face. Her agoraphobia was a lock, and her house was the key she had thrown away. Loneliness was her constant companion, a quiet, suffocating presence. It was in this state of profound isolation that she found the journal. Tucked away in a forgotten trunk in the attic, it was a handsome leather-bound volume, empty save for a single intriguing entry on the first page. Written in an elegant looping script was a name and address: Mr. Frederick Forsyth, Rose Cottage, Willow Creek Lane. Beneath it, a simple, inviting sentence. Should you seek a kindred spirit, write. On a whim born of a loneliness that had finally become unbearable, Loretta decided to answer the invitation. She wrote a short, hesitant letter, introducing herself as merely a resident of this house, a soul as confined as he presumably was. She described the way the afternoon light fell across her Persian rug. She asked him about the birds he could see from his window. She sealed the envelope and, in a feat of courage that left her trembling, opened her front door just wide enough to place the letter in the mail carrier's box. She expected nothing. A week later, a reply arrived. The envelope was thick, creamy parchment, the handwriting a work of art. The letter within was the most beautiful thing Loretta had ever read. Frederick Forsyth wrote not of confinement, but of solitude. He described his world, the small quiet rooms of his cottage, the steadfast companionship of his books, the ancient oak tree that stood guard over his garden. He wrote with a poet's soul and an empathy that seemed to see directly into Loretta's own frightened heart. Thus began the correspondence that became Loretta's life. His letters were her world. Through his words, she felt the cool breeze he described, smelled the rain on the dry earth outside the window, and heard the whisper of the leaves on his great oak tree. She, in turn, opened her heart to him. She confessed her fears, her suffocating anxiety, the secret shame of her self-imposed prison. He never judged. He never pushed. He simply understood. She fell in love, deeply and completely, with the man who lived in the ink. He was her soulmate, a kindred spirit separated only by distance. His letters were a daily reprieve from her silent, gray existence. She would read them over and over, his words of balm on the raw wound of her loneliness. After a year of this passionate literary romance, the tone of Frederick's letters began to change. He wrote of a strange weariness, a feeling of growing thin and transparent. His beautiful script seemed fainter on the page. His final letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning. It was short, the words seemingly etched with great effort. My dearest Loretta, it began, I feel the world growing dim, and my thoughts are like scattered leaves. I fear my ink runs dry. You have been the solitary light in my long twilight. Should you ever find the courage to face the sun, come see the oak tree we spoke of. It will remember me for you. Yours in spirit, Frederick. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of Loretta's fear. The thought of his letters stopping, of that connection being severed, was more terrifying than anything the outside world could possibly hold. His love had given her a world beyond her walls, and now she could not bear to lose it. She just had to see him. She had to tell him what he meant to her, face to face. Her love for Frederick finally became stronger than her fear. Leaving the house was like stepping off a cliff. The roar of a passing car was a physical blow. The open sky was a vast, terrifying void. The sight of other people, their faces a blur of motion, sent waves of nausea through her. Clutching his address like a holy relic, she managed to hail a taxi, squeezing her eyes shut and whispering his name until the vehicle shuddered to a halt. Here you are, ma'am, the driver said. Willow Creek Lane. Loretta opened her eyes. She was not on a quaint, cottage-lined lane. The taxi was parked before the wrought iron gates of a cemetery. Willow Creek Rest, the sign read, the letters green with age. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. She paid the driver, her hands shaking, and stumbled through the gates. An old groundskeeper, trimming a hedge, tipped his hat to her. I'm looking for Rose Cottage, Loretta stammered, the home of Mr. Frederick Forsyth. The groundskeeper gave her a kind, pitying look. Rose Cottage is what we call the old shed over there, he said, pointing with his shears. Been the groundskeeper's cottage for 100 years. As for Mr. Forsyth, you'll find him up on the hill, under the big oak tree. Loretta's blood ran cold. She walked as if in a dream, her feet moving numbly over the manicured grass. She followed a winding path up a gentle slope, the world silent save for the frantic beating of her own heart. Then she saw it, a magnificent oak tree, its branches spreading wide like protective arms, exactly as he had described it. Beneath the tree was a single weathered headstone, leaning slightly with age. Loretta knelt, her fingers tracing the faded, moss-filled letters carved into the stone. Frederick Forsyth, beloved poet, born 1861, died 1892. The world dissolved into a meaningless blur. The letters, the shared secrets, the love. It had all been so real, but it had crossed an impossible chasm of time. He was not a recluse. He was a ghost. His profound loneliness, trapped for over a century in that small plot of earth, had reached out and found hers. The kindred spirit she had written to was a kindred spirit himself indeed, a fellow prisoner of solitude, separated not by walls, but by death itself. She didn't scream. She didn't run. The terror that had ruled her life for 20 years was gone, replaced by a strange and profound peace. She thought of his last words, yours, in spirit. Loretta Watts laid her hand upon the cold stone of his grave, a first, final, impossible touch. He had given her the greatest gift of all. A man who had been dead for over a century had taught her how to live. His love had been the key, unlocking her prison from the other side of eternity. And so, we leave Loretta Watts, standing not in a dusty, shuttered room, but under an open sky, her long exile finally over. In her love for a dead man, she was resurrected, a testament to the fact that sometimes the deepest connections are not bound by the laws of the living, and that a cry of loneliness can echo for over 100 years, waiting for the right person to hear it. A final, quiet exhibit here in the Night Cafe. And so our tour concludes. The lights are dimming, and the time has come to return you to the world you know. Or is it the world you think you know? We hope your visit has been an educational one. We've shown you portraits of obsession, landscapes of regret, and still lifes of damnation. We've seen men who built their own prisons, who wished away their futures, and who took a final ride on a bus bound for nowhere. These are more than just stories, you see. They're cautionary tales, hung on the wall here in the cafe as a warning, a reminder that for every ambition, there is a price. For every shortcut, a toll, and for every closed door, something on the other side is waiting patiently. So as you leave us tonight and step out into the cool night air, take a moment. Look at the shadows, listen to the silence, and consider the possibility that there are other cafes like this in every town, on every quiet street, and that you, at any moment, might become a subject for a new exhibit. We'll be waiting for you. Good night.